Hey all you YouTubers, welcome back to Tournage Dubois. This week's episode, we're going to look at what items I currently turned and what lessons I've learned from them. I'm Double D, and I hope you enjoy this journey with me. So I bought this lathe in 2016. It was something I'd been wanting to do, was learn how to turn. April of 2016, I turned my first item, this candlestick. I obviously put the metal cup on the end to hold a candle. So, I learned a lot of things from this. This was turned out of a 2x4 that I had cut in half, so I ripped it to make it a 2x2. And I used primarily just three tools. I used my skew, I used my parting tool, and I used a spindle gouge. So in these three tools, I was able to mainly just look at what types of cuts they would make, what types of angles they would come up with, and just a way to build on that and to learn each tool how it works and what it's capable of doing. So I focused just on the three tools, just started using them to make different cuts. One thing I did learn is that pine, which is what most of your 2x4s are made of, are very soft wood, so they tend to not cut as easily. It's a great wood to start with, just as you're learning how to control the speed of your lathe, the tool angles, things like that. But I did find on the bottom here, you see this little groove. If you don't have it pushed in tight enough, then the wood will catch on your tool and stop while the lathe continues to spin. And that creates this little gouge in the bottom here. So the one big lesson I learned with this item was to make sure that the tailstock is pushed all the way up to secure the wood against the headstock so that it spins appropriately, it minimizes your catches, and that it will also keep your piece from grooving out in a way that you don't want it to do. So this is the second piece I turned. I took this from a 4x4, cut it off a nice good length for it, and just put it on the lathe and started turning. With this one, I wanted to try and do different types of cuts. This one was done earlier this year, so I took quite a break between the first time I used my lathe and then this year. Almost 4 years. So this was my second attempt to do any turning. Some things that I did differently is underneath the cap here, I cut a little angled groove just to see about just different cuts, learning to make things a little bit more rounded. Doing a stair-step pattern just to get different cuts and feel the way the tool handled against the wood as it would turn. Overall, it's of course significantly larger, as you can tell, from one to the next. The thing I learned best about this is, once again, pine is a very soft wood. So as you look, you're going to see some chips and nicking that is caused by the tool grabbing the wood and it not wanting to cut properly. A lot of this is based on the angle of how you have the tool set. So I was learning that if you don't have the tool at the right angle, which originally I was holding a lot of it very parallel to the floor or perpendicular to the wood, and with those steel-tipped lathe tools, you want to hold them at the right angle. So with the angle, as you can see, there's a little bit of an angled bevel on this. So you want to hold it to where that is just scraping the wood and will take off pieces of whatever you're turning. So this is very handy to know. Unfortunately, I didn't really learn this right away because I hadn't started watching a lot of other videos to learn what other people were doing. I was just kind of trial and error as to what I would learn and how I would do things. So this was a big improvement though. I was very happy with this overall. I did, like I said, I learned quite a bit as I was turning this. Here's some more of the gouging right along this edge here, just the rough areas. I was still able to sand it, so it turned out really well. It does hold a nice candle. But once again, just turning with the pine wood, which is cheaper, which saves a lot of money, and gives you the ability to practice and practice a little bit before you really start doing anything. So that's the second item I ever turned. And the next item I turned is, you guessed it, a candlestick. These are really easy to turn just to get started, to get a feel for how the lathe works, how the tools work. There's not a lot of intricacies to it other than what you cut into the wood. Once again, this has a very disjointed feel as I was learning, once again, just continuing to refresh myself, learn more about angles of the tools, learn what make different cuts, how to widen the cuts, narrow the cuts, etc. This was the first one I ever tried doing any hollowing out. So I had just gotten my Nova headstock grip. That allows you to grab the end of it and turn, either through a mortise or a tenon. This was before I knew how to do mortises or tenons or had ever even attempted one. So I had just held it, the end of the wood in the piece, and let it turn. It's very rough, as you can probably see in here. It's very rough because the steel tools that I have, once again, learning the angles and things like that, but pine is very soft still. So what we see is it would catch quite a bit on here, so it made it very rough. Overall, I was very happy with the outcome, in that I learned more things. Once again, I learned better about the angles. There aren't as many catches on this item as there were. I put different techniques of grooves underneath the head where the candle would be held. I tried to groove out the inside just to cut it out a little bit for a candle to sit down into. A couple of things I learned: this wobbles just a little bit. My parting tool, I was learning how to part things off, and because it wasn't set in there properly, it got a little bit of an angle to it, so it wobbles. Once again, lessons learned. Very good opportunities for me to continue growing on my journey for wood turning. Guess what? Another candlestick. June of this year, 2020, I had gone up to the in-laws and they had cut down some trees on their property around some buildings. I took some of that down, brought it home, and decided to try and turn it. Didn't do a lot of intricacies with this one, just focused on getting nice smooth patterns. Was really happy with how it turned out. There's not a lot of gouging, there's not a lot of catching because I had started getting better at the angle at which I was holding the tool. The biggest two lessons that I learned from this item: one, I wasn't very good with mortises and tenons. A tenon is a piece that you build out or you leave on from the wood for the jaws to grab a hold of, and then you can cut that off later. A mortise is a section that's hollowed out that the jaws would go into and expand and hold there. I can show you some mortises on the next few items that I have. Needless to say, I wasn't good at it at all, and so you get a little bit of a raised area. I didn't even really try it on this one. The whole layers from the headstock holding it on, etc. The other thing that I learned is if you turn wood that's too wet, what happens is after you've turned it, you're really happy with it, it starts drying out. The water vapor leaves the wood as it dries quicker from the ends of the wood, where the portions of the tree grow. So if the tree is growing this way, anything you cut where the tree is growing will allow that moisture to evaporate quicker. This will cause cracking in the wood as it dries. So that's just something to be aware of. If your wood's not quite dry enough, when you're turning it, then you're going to end up with it cracking because the moisture is going to continue evaporating. So that's something that I learned. Don't turn wood when it's too wet unless you have a way to dry it quickly, or some other things that you can do to minimize that, which I'm still learning as I go. But overall, was very happy with the change from one candlestick to the next. So as we go back and look real quickly from the first item I ever turned, then on to the second, the third, and now to the most recent one of just the series of candlesticks that I was working on. There's a big transition as I'm learning things and as I'm growing as a turner. So I'm very happy with the progress that I've made, albeit over 4 years. I had that big break in the middle, but to me there's just a big quality difference in what I've learned and applying that as we go. So now we're on to the fifth item I've ever turned in my life. This is not a candlestick. Big change, I know. Hang on to your seats, folks. We're going to have some fun. This is a vase that I turned, also out of the wood I got from my in-laws' house. the couple of things that I did, I got my new tools. So I got my carbide tipped tools, which allow for better control. So the last candlestick I turned on June 13th. This item I turned on June 14th. This is the first item I ever hollowed out in detail. So I spent a lot of time working on this item to get the inside hollowed out for this vase. I had turned a tenon on the end, which worked out really well. So it stuck out a little bit, held it very firmly, and then I was able to go and part that off, and was very happy with the change between this parting off and tenon than I had on the others. I then stained it a red color. This really accentuated the grain. I was very happy with it. One thing I learned is since I do not have a hollowing tool, which is a little bit longer and has a curved neck on it, I wasn't able to quite hollow this out the way I wanted to. I obviously wanted in a vase, you wanted to open more at the bottom to hold more water if you have a vase that's made for holding water. So this one's going to be more of a display vase. Overall, very, very happy with how it turned out. A lot of things that I've learned moving forward. This was just the first one that I turned with my new my new carbide tools, and the quality difference is just amazing. So having better tools, learning new ways of doing things. I've spent a lot of time recently watching a lot of other YouTube videos for learning techniques, processes, watching how they cut, watching how they do things, and talk through has been really helpful to me, and that's why I wanted to start this series, so you could see how I grow, and hopefully I can share with you some lessons that I've learned. Overall, very happy with this item, fifth item I ever turned in my life, and at the end I'll show you a shot as we go through with all of the items. And we're going to fast forward 3 whole days from the day I turned my vase. I turned these 2 items. So I've been at a much faster pace, of course, at how I turn things as I'm learning, and as I see the progress, I get really excited. So I turned 2 items on the same day, both from more wood from the in-laws, but I had some of this dried. So this one is my first attempt at any sort of a live edge. A live edge just means this was the edge of the actual tree that was living. Usually you want the bark taken off. Bark will continue to grow, will end up flaking and falling off over time, and you really don't want to have to clean up an additional mess. Once again, I went back to a candlestick because I thought this was a pretty simple way to do this. It wasn't quite all the way dry, so I do have a little bit of cracking here near the bottom, as you can see, and then just a little bit at the top. But for the most part, it's not any sort of concern for anything that I've done since this is a candlestick holder. The shaping was very good. It was very easy to turn. I liked the offset edge, getting that smoothness. This one was difficult to sand, so I learned a lot about how to sand, what I can do with sanding on the lathe, what types of sanding I need to do by hand, that kind of thing to try and make things a little bit easier as I go. So I turned that candlestick. The next thing I turned was this cup. This is out of the same wood. If you notice, it has a different color because I used a little bit different process, something I had not done previously. So on this item, after I turned it, I used Axe abrasive sanding paste, which is, I don't remember the exact grit, but you use that and then you use a paper towel to wipe it on and continue to wipe it on the lathe and keep the pressure on it. And that acts as an additional sanding abrasive to it to really smooth it up. So it worked out really, really well. And then I used Axe polishing finish paste on it, which gives it a little bit of a different color. It's all natural with beeswax, carnauba oils, things like that, which is really, really helpful, and I really like the finished look of it because it still obviously is wood. It doesn't look painted like the stained item, which, don't get me wrong, I like the stained item as well, but this has a much more natural feel. This one was also my very first successful mortise. So I hollowed that out. The jaws go into it, it expands, and it holds on the jaw vise clamp portion of the headstock right here. So it sits over that portion, and then you expand it, and it keeps it centered while it turns. That was my very first successful one. Worked out really, really well. Once again, I don't have the proper hollowing tool, so I couldn't quite hollow it out as much as I wanted to. I also didn't have the longer rests that I talked about briefly on in the last video. I didn't have the longer rests, so my tools couldn't quite get into the wood as far as I needed it to get a good feel. So once again, that's another lesson learned. The other thing is that it's not real smooth as I go from inside and draw my finger out. It's not, there's a little bit of waviness in the wood, and that's just based on my ability to cut it with the shorter tool that I have in this process. So my next big tool purchase there is going to be a hollowing tool, which I think will help out quite a bit with me to be able to get the items hollowed out better. I'll also be getting a sanding tool that will go into whatever I'm hollowing out, which will allow me to sand it a lot better as well. Overall, super happy with the progress that's made there. Having my first successful mortise was a huge step and was a big boost to me personally in the quality of work that I'm able to do. And now to the most recent item that I have turned. My good friend Darren had a tree come down in his front yard, so I took a lot of the logs off his hands because, hey, it's free wood, gives me a chance to turn it, etc. Different types of wood, not pine. And it's even cheaper than pine because, like I said, it's free. So this one, I also was able to do a mortise in. Super happy with this. This was made from the crotch of a tree, so the tree trunk came out and then two branches came out to the sides. And I'll post some pictures at the end of the video with different steps through this because I documented this one pretty well, which I hadn't done most of the others previously, other than some still shots at the end when it was finished. Overall, super happy. So this is, of course, where the tree trunk was, and then these two areas up here are where the two limbs came out. There was another limb that had at some point fallen out, rotted, and left a nice hole in the side, which I really liked the look of that, so I left it there. Where the tree came down, this would have been some bark area, so it's once again a little live edge. And as I said, I'll post some pictures. So a couple of things I learned from this one. This one was also finished with axe paste. It's a different type of wood, so you get a different coloring, the darker wood with the light. I really like the contrasts of that with the little bit of live edge, and then once again with the hole. This again was very wet wood. So as it has been, the water has been evaporating, we've developed a little bit of cracking. So I have some cracking there. I have a little bit right here above this hole that wasn't there before. You can see it a little bit better from this side as well, just the cracking. The other thing is now the bowl wobbles just a little bit. As the moisture is leaving the wood, it's warping a little bit, it's cracking, it's contracting, expanding, and so it's pulling the wood apart a little. So what I'm probably going to do with this one is let it get really dry, and then I'm thinking about redoing this with, so putting an insert into the wood to take up a big bunch of space, and then doing a resin cast around this, and then put it back on the lathe. That would give me a nice turn. It would, the epoxy resin would fill in all the holes because I put it in my pressure pot. So then I basically would have a new bowl with both wood and the epoxy resin. So we could get some really interesting colors. The epoxy resin would go into the cracks and fill that. It would obviously fill this hole up and just give a really nice feel. It would probably fill in this area as well, so you'd have the wood and then it would have a slight area of the epoxy resin. So I'm thinking about doing that. Feel free to leave your comments in the notes below. If you have any feedback, any ideas as to even a color, if you think I should do a specific color with it, please let me know. I'm happy to take suggestions, and I'll be happy to turn that. With my videos going forward, now that I've kind of got up to speed with what I started with my tools and then what I've turned so far, future videos are going to be actual products that I turn or projects that I do. So it might be some epoxy resin casting, wood turning, wood epoxy resin turning mixes, any other types of woodworking projects that I'm working on. When I build my shop, I plan on setting up my camera on a tripod on a time lapse and just allowing that to take a whole bunch of photos and then splice those all together for a quick video building the shop. So just things I'm thinking of doing to keep you guys entertained, but also to see my journey and transition along with me. So once again, I'm gonna end this video out with photos of the different steps with each of these items, each item all together. And if you like this video, please click subscribe, click the little bell icon. That'll let you get notifications when a new video posts. I appreciate everybody that's subscribed so far. I hope that I can keep you entertained. I hope that you can learn. I hope I can learn, and together we can have some happy turning. Thanks. See you next week.